Good evening. If you're just joining us, you are in the right place if you want to participate in the City of San Carlos Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan community workshop. So we will get started in a couple of minutes. So please just wait patiently while we allow other folks to join us. Okay. For those of you who have just joined us, you are at the City of San Carlos Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Workshop, and we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're still waiting for folks to join us. We still have a couple folks joining us. We will get started by 6:35. Thank you to those of you who joined us right at 6:30.
Now say hi.
Okay. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and mute you, but your audio does work.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Well, we will have people joining us as we go throughout the evening, but let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tammy Seal with PlaceWorks. I'm a consultant to the City of San Carlos, and I'll be your guide through this evening's Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan workshop. We're really excited that you're here and that you're able to join us to learn more about the city's Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan and to join us in some small group discussions. So before we get too far into it, we have a short poll that we would really appreciate your participation in. There are 4 questions. You should now be able to see a poll in the middle of your screen for those of you joining by computer. And you can scroll down on the right to get to the 3rd and 4th questions if you're not able to see those in your view. So this is another opportunity for us to allow a couple more folks to join us before we jump right in. Looks like many of you are able to access the poll, so thanks for doing that.
Get rid of it?
There was a poll there that I was supposed to do.
Oh.
And it's okay if you're not able to take the survey or the poll, that is okay. It's not required, and all the results are anonymous. We're doing this just to have an opportunity, you know, an interactive opportunity. And there is one question at the end that will help us know whether to cover a little bit of content for you or not related to your comfort with the Zoom software we're using this evening. So let's do one last round for those of you who have not taken the survey. If you if you've taken it, make sure that you are able to, you've hit submit on your answer. Okay. We are still getting folks coming in. So thanks for your patience with this new format for all of us as we still seek to find ways to engage you while we're all sheltered at home. Okay, so it looks like we might be at the point of capacity here at the poll. This is last call to submit your answers to the poll.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. I will end the poll in just a few seconds here, but I can go ahead and talk to you a little bit about what we see in these results, that you're pretty split on those of you who have participated in a workshop compared to those, like more of you, this is your first time in a workshop for the city of San Carlos, so welcome. We really appreciate that you're willing to join us virtually through Zoom online tonight. That said, a great majority of you have attended a city council meeting, so you're engaged, and we really appreciate that. It's helpful for us to know that that many of the techniques we use to share information about the workshop reached you, while it looks like most of you found out about this through the city's newsletter or email from the city. And we can see that other techniques worked as well. So it's always good to know that we have to try it all to make sure that we get the word out. And our last question is an important one because we want to make sure that folks are comfortable using Zoom. So for those of you who answered the poll, all of you said that you do not need a brief overview of how to use Zoom before we get started. So that means that we will not give an overview of Zoom. We normally have a few slides that we share with folks to make sure everybody's on the same page. So we're not going to do that, but if something happens during the meeting, if you have trouble with your audio, with the video, or any concerns about using the software, please look we have a person, Tarina Wilson on our team in the participant section, you will see her labeled as Zoom questions, ask me. And she's the perfect person for you to send a note in the chat with any questions you have about the software. And so then that takes us to a couple points of procedure for this evening. So right now, everyone is muted, and we would like to keep everyone muted throughout the presentation. When you go into small groups, you'll unmute and you'll be able to have an open conversation for about an hour. So that means that during the presentation, which will be in the next 20 minutes or so, we will welcome your questions through the chat box. And so you'll be able to send those chat questions to me. I'm Tammy Seal with Placeworks, and I'm labeled in the participant box or when you open your chat as project questions. And so please send any questions that you have. We will, after the presentation, we will have a moment where we take questions. So that's how we're going to go through the meeting tonight. And we're really excited that you're all here with us. And I'd like to now take the opportunity to welcome Mayor Ron Collins. And he has a few remarks that he'd like to share with us this meeting as we get started.
Thank you, Tammy, and welcome everybody to our Climate Action Workshop. I believe this is the first of two. And thanks for joining us for this important discussion on this online meeting format. We strive to generate discussion and promote community engagement regardless of the circumstances. I'd also like to welcome Vice Mayor Laura Palmer-Lohan, who is joining us tonight. We recognize the necessity of taking local action to solve large-scale problems such as climate change. As we've seen with the coronavirus pandemic response, our local governments and institutions play a key role in serving our communities to address issues that are bigger than any one community. In San Carlos, we are lucky to have many partners that help serve San Carlos. We look forward to a discussion on possible actions we can take to address climate change across sectors like energy, transportation, land use, waste management that will foster a more sustainable community. At the same time, we want to better understand how San Carlos is vulnerable to some of the hazards posed by climate change, such as extreme heat, wildfires, and sea level rise, and proactively identify strategies to adapt to these threats. The ultimate goal of this type of long-term strategic planning is to foster a sustainable community while enhancing the quality of life we all have come to enjoy in San Carlos, and as we call it, the city of good living. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation and group discussions. I'm now going to turn it back over to Tammy Seal with Placeworks to start the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. Okay, so I've gone over a little bit about our plans for this evening, but what we want to do first with you is provide a presentation to go provide an introduction of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan, an overview on the city's progress with the implementation of the existing Climate Action Plan, go over some results of work we've done so far, and then provide an opportunity to answer some questions. But the most time we've dedicated this evening will be to breakout room discussions. And after an hour in the breakout room discussions, we'll come back together in this large group format and welcome a representative from each group to share the highlights of their discussion, and we'll wrap up after that. So we do plan to spend the full time together this evening. I do want to share with all of you that this meeting is being recorded, and we will make the recording available on the city's website after this evening for those who are not able to join us. I also want to remind you that those of you who received emails from Adam when you registered often probably also received a link to a set of handouts. And if you didn't have time to take a look at those handouts before this evening, we'd encourage you to go back and take a look at those after tonight, or if you have the opportunity to access those might come in handy during the small group discussions. They're absolutely not required. We just want to make sure to remind you that you have that resource available to you on the city's website. Okay. So I do want to take a moment and do some quick introductions. We have a fantastic team of Cities of San Carlos staff and also staff from our consultant team of Placeworks. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm Tammy Seal, the project manager with Placeworks. The city's project manager is Adam Lakar. He's the management analyst and sustainability specialist. We're also joined this evening by Tara Peterson, the assistant city manager, and Nicole Scott, the senior management analysis in the city manager's office. And our consultant team includes Eli Crispy, who you'll hear from in just a moment, Jacqueline Protzman, and Tarina Wilson. So you'll see these folks when you go into your small groups. You're also going to meet other City of San Carlos staff who have joined us this evening to help with facilitation and note-taking. And they'll be a great resource to you. So we're gonna breeze right through these Zoom tips because you've got a great mastery of Zoom now. I imagine this might not be the first Zoom meeting today for many of you. So now I'd like to turn it over to Eli to provide a presentation for us.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you all, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about San Carlos's existing climate action plan and how it has led to the climate mitigation and adaptation plan that we are in the process of developing. So San Carlos's existing climate action plan was put together or was adopted in 2009 as part of the city's general plan update, a comprehensive update of the city's plan to grow and develop. The Climate Action Plan acts as a strategic plan to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. And in doing so, it sets a target of reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 15% below what they were measured to be in 2005 by 2020. It identifies 21 specific steps that the city planned to undertake to achieve the target. The city went back in 2015 and took a look at their greenhouse gas emissions and confirmed that progress was indeed being made towards that reduction level. So even as late as 5 years ago, the city was very clearly on a path to achieving its target, and I will be able to give you an update on that a little later. The existing climate action plan also acts as what's called a qualified greenhouse gas reduction strategy. This is something that the city is allowed to do under the state's environmental CEQA law, and it helps streamline new development projects that are being prepared in a climate responsible way. So certainly our goal for this updated climate mitigation and adaptation plan will be to continue that designation. So since the CAP was adopted in 2009, the city and community members have taken some very significant steps to reduce emissions. This is a list of just a few of them. It includes everything from increased renewable energy being used in the city and improved public transit and transit-oriented development projects, all the way to actions that the city government has taken internally, such as an environmentally preferred purchasing policy and a dedicated city sustainability staff. These internal actions help to show the city's leadership on climate action, and they also help to support community-wide action. This includes not only things that have occurred just within San Carlos, but it has also included some larger regional efforts, such as participation in the countywide Peninsula Clean Energy, or PCE program, which began a few years ago. So the CAP has been quite successful, but there is now a need to update the document in response to new state regulations and conditions. And this updated document is what we're calling the CMAP, the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan. It will continue to serve, as the CAP has done, to function as the city's strategic pathway towards a more sustainable and a more resilient future that will continue to reduce San Carlos's greenhouse gas emissions and improve community resilience to climate change. It's going to be based on a technical foundation that's meant to be inclusive and grounded in accepted science and be consistent with all appropriate regulations and guidance. It's also going to be founded on the principle of very open and productive dialogue with community members and community stakeholders. That is a critical part of the process, as we'll talk about. And it's something that residents, business owners, city staff, all stakeholders really should be able to see and understand their role and the importance that they play in achieving the CMAP's target and its overall vision. So the CMAP has several individual components to it that are listed here. We'll go over many of these in our presentation tonight. In addition to this, we really want to make sure that the CMAP is responsive to San Carlos's unique conditions, the unique character of the community that needs to be reflected in the plan. It has to certainly be practical and useful, not only for city staff and elected officials, but also to community members. We want it to be very easily understood. It shouldn't be full of jargon and complicated, hard to understand concepts. We really want this to be something that is clearly and readily available and accessible to the community. It is going to be developed in a process that we want to be very inclusive, very equitable, very transparent and open. Certainly community engagement, as I said, is going to be a critical component of this project. And again, it needs to be grounded in accepted science. It needs to be consistent with all applicable regulations and guidance. And it should really have a very strong technical and legal foundation as well. So part of why we are doing this is in response to some new state efforts that have come about since the CAP was adopted in 2009. Since then, the state has adopted some new longer-term greenhouse gas reduction targets and goals listed here. We really do want to keep San Carlos's greenhouse gas reduction efforts consistent and appropriate and in line with what the state is doing, including looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions out as far as 2050. We also do want to respond to some new state laws that require communities to plan for the risk that is posed by climate change and to increase their resilience to various natural hazards, such as wildfires and floods. So we will be including that in the CMAP in accordance with state guidance. The CMAP is prepared in a three-phase process. So right now we're wrapping up phase one. This is primarily the technical work that will set the foundation for the project. Moving forward, we are going to prepare as part of phase two strategies that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase community resilience, and really help achieve the project's goals. Phase three will then be preparation of the plan document itself, the review of that document, and ultimately adopting it, we hope in spring of next year. Community outreach and engagement really is a critical part of this project. It will be ongoing throughout all three phases. Community members, including residents, businesses, community organizations and institutions, even visitors, they are all key members, key partners with the city to achieve both short-term and long-term goals in the CMAP. The city really is committed to a broad outreach and engagement strategy during the preparation of this plan. So effectively engaging you all and other members of the community, that is really successful to this project.
Gravy and rice, refried beans and rice, pizza bread.
This is a close-up of what we hope to be doing during phase one, or I should say what we have done. We have assessed the actions that have occurred at a state, regional, and local level that have really driven climate action to date. And then we've prepared some new assessments that we're going to go over, the updates to the city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory and a community-wide climate change vulnerability assessment. Moving forward, these are some of the other components of the project that we will be taking care of. We are going to assess how San Carlos's greenhouse gas emissions are expected to change in the future and what level the city should strive to reduce those emissions to in order to be consistent with the state's targets and goals and also with the direction that the community would like to see. We will be preparing new policies, as I mentioned. We will be developing an implementation program, and that will make sure that San Carlos really has the tools and the information needed to put the plan into effect as soon as it is adopted. There is also an environmental review process that will be happening. And again, the community engagement is going to continue throughout the project, really up until its completion. So with that overview out of the way, I am now going to walk through some of the technical work that we've done so far on the CMAP. And the first has been preparation of the community-wide greenhouse gas inventory. The greenhouse gas inventory is an assessment of the greenhouse gas emissions that are attributed to San Carlos. So we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions that have occurred from activities of all community members. That includes residents, businesses, employees, visitors, really anyone who is active in some way within the community. We have looked at greenhouse gas emissions from 2005. That will set the baseline year, the baseline conditions against which we measure progress. And then we have also looked at emissions for several interim years, most recently 2018, and that shows the progress that the city has made. And these inventories are based on what is called the RICAPS program, which is a regional process that, that most communities in San Mateo County participate in. So this is all being done in a manner that is consistent with what is happening up and down the peninsula. So these are the results of the updated greenhouse gas inventory. As you can see, transportation, which is the teal bar, that is consistently the largest source of San Mateo's greenhouse gas emissions. That's being caused by cars and trucks on the roads. Residential and non-residential energy use, those are the green and the light red bars towards the bottom of the graph. Those are consistently the next largest sources, and that is the electricity and natural gas that is being used in homes and businesses and other buildings. And there are a handful of other sectors that tend to have a much smaller impact on San Carlos's greenhouse gas emissions, but they are still worth inventorying and noting. As you can see, the emissions have declined pretty consistently since 2005. You know, I mentioned that the city was making progress towards a goal of reducing its emissions 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. As of 2018, San Carlos's emissions were 25% below the 2005 level. So the city is very much on track to meet, hopefully exceed that target when we come around to looking at the updated numbers in a few years. So there's been very good progress that's being made, and we hope to continue that in the CMAP. To highlight a few specifics from the inventory, we have seen pretty significant decreases in both residential and non-residential electricity use. This is largely a sign of increased energy efficiency in the community. Even while population has grown, the electricity use has fallen. So community members are really conserving energy and being more efficient about how it's used. The community has also transitioned to Peninsula Clean Energy. In 2018, PCE supplied 91% of San Carlos's electricity, including 97% of the electricity used in households. Peninsula Clean Energy gets 95% of its electricity from renewable and other carbon-free greenhouse gas sources. So that program has really helped to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. It probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that vehicle miles traveled have increased. There's more cars and trucks on the road, people are driving more, but because cars have gotten quite a bit cleaner, there has actually been a decrease in emissions from transportation. Community members have also been reducing their water use since 2005, hopefully in response to some of the drought conditions and increased awareness around some water scarcity issues. So that will take us to the other technical analysis that we've done so far, and that is the vulnerability assessment. So the CMAP is really looking at ways not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to improve resilience to climate change related hazards. So the vulnerability assessment is the technical foundation to that work. The vulnerability assessment will describe how climate related hazards like wildfire, flooding, sea level rise, and so on are expected to change over time. It will look at, or does look at, the people and the community assets that are most at risk from climate-related hazards, and it will try to determine how susceptible those populations and assets are to these different hazards. The vulnerability assessment builds on a lot of existing work that has been completed over the past few years at the state and regional level, and it will also tie into the general plan update that the city has recently begun, and will integrate into that general plan update to meet some new state laws. So the vulnerability assessment tries to answer a handful of key questions. It's going to look at what are the biggest hazards of concern in San Carlos, not only what are they presently, but what might they be in the future. It will look at how people and community assets might be affected, and community assets being buildings and infrastructure, but also the natural environment, economic systems, and so on. It's going to look at who and what in San Carlos are most vulnerable to climate change and to what hazards in particular. And then ultimately, it will inform policies in the climate mitigation and adaptation plan to help the city be more resilient, to reduce vulnerability and make for a stronger, safer community. So on the left-hand side, these are the hazards that we are assessing in the vulnerability assessment. We're looking not only at what might be thought of as kind of the common natural disasters, things like flooding and wildfire, but we also want to look at some of the more chronic issues such as drought, extreme heat, sea level rise, just to make sure that we are really being holistic in our approach and capturing a broad pattern, a broad spectrum of the challenges that the community may face in the future. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking at not only the impacts to populations in San Carlos, but also to buildings, infrastructure, economic assets, ecosystems and natural resources, and key community services like transportation, public safety, energy, and so on. Just to sort of illustrate the challenges a little, I did want to show this map that indicates some of the hazard areas of concern in the community. So if we have found that by 2050, there's a possibility for sea level rise to be causing some permanent flooding as far inland as Industrial Road, and then potentially temporary flooding even further inland. And all this time, parts of the community that are closer to the hill are expected to continue to be at significant risk of wildfires, and that risk factor is unfortunately expected to increase as climate change continues. And there is also an increased risk of some inland flooding from the creeks and in some of the lower lying areas closer to the shoreline. And that does include some areas that are on the hillside of the Caltrain tracks. So these are some of the key takeaways from the vulnerability assessment. There are much more detailed results behind this that will be written up and included in the CMAP, but we did want to provide an overview this evening. So we find that there is an increase in extreme heat days, and combined with increased population or increased pollution from wildfires, which unfortunately we've all become rather familiar with over the past week, that is likely to create some higher health risks for many community members, including those who might already be susceptible to some of those health-related challenges. Sea level rise is expected to cause some both permanent and temporary flooding near the shoreline, and that may affect not only the transportation networks that are around there, but also can affect some of the key businesses and drivers of San Carlos's economy that are located in that area. Persons with disabilities, senior citizens, others with some limited mobility, they are likely to face challenges during evacuation events, and there is a possibility for those events to become more frequent as climate change continues. Events such as flooding, landslides, and wildfires, those are likely to pose an increased risk of property and infrastructure damage. And there is also an increased risk to the ecosystems in San Carlos and to the natural setting, particularly from droughts, flooding, and extreme heat events. On top of that, we have also seen there is a possibility for potential disruptions to the energy networks in the area. Wildfire is, of course, a major driver of that, but there is also possibility for energy disruptions from extreme heat and various forms of severe weather. And we bring this up not to cast things in a negative light or to instill any sort of bad feelings about all this, but really to say these are the challenges that the community is facing, and they are real and they are significant. But fortunately, there are actions that can be taken to reduce all of this. These vulnerabilities can be addressed. These risks can be reduced. And the whole goal of a major goal of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Plan is going to be to put in the policies and to implement the policies that will help San Carlos adapt to these challenges and make it so that these threats that we've just talked about are less of an issue. So with that, I will turn it over to Adam, who's going to talk a little about the community outreach and engagement approach.
Great, thanks Eli on that happy note. Just to go over our engagement strategy and stakeholder engagement strategy. For us, this is really, we're looking to provide avenues for stakeholders and community at large to give us feedback through all phases of this project, and really for this to be a community-driven process. So tonight, right now, this is really the first round of community engagement. We're just here to introduce this project, review some of the work that you've just seen, some of the technical work, and in a moment, what we'll do is discuss, brainstorm some strategies that we can implement to address these issues locally. Later in the project, there will still be plenty of opportunities for engagement on drafting actual strategies and the plan itself. So if you're particularly interested in this, that's great. Tonight is not going to be your only opportunity to be engaged with this project. So we're trying to find as many opportunities to create those avenues as possible that are still safe within a COVID world. So you should have received a spotlight newsletter that went over some of these topics. We do have a project website. It's just cityofsancarlos.org/climate. That's probably the best place to go for updates and things like that. We will be presenting to advisory bodies and seeking their feedback. We're holding workshops like this one. And then later on, we'll certainly have stakeholder meetings that'll be maybe more intimate and can dive into details. So, and obviously, ultimately, the review and consideration of the draft and the final CMAP will go through public hearings as well, which offers another avenue for feedback.
Great, thank you, Adam and Eli. So we do have time to answer a few questions. We have received a couple questions through the chat. So I also want to, if you have a question and you haven't sent it to us yet, please go ahead and send that to us through the chat. You can send them to me, Tammy. I'm labeled project questions, ask me. Tarina is also getting some at Zoom questions, ask me. So we have a couple. I'll go ahead and get us started, and we can absolutely take some more. So the first question, I think Eli may have answered this later in the presentation. This one came in early. What is RICAPS? So Adam or Eli, would you like to give a little background on RICAPS?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. RICAPS stands for the Regionally Integrated Climate Action Planning Suite. Might be wrong on the last letter there. It is a group of sustainability professionals from different cities who collaborate on climate action planning, and it's also an avenue through which we can share data and collaborate.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's been available as a collaboration and information sharing group for at least 10 years, I think, right? So it's been a great resource to the city and a great way to pool and share information. So we have a question: when will the vulnerability assessment be publicly released? We have not prepared the written summary of that. So I think that's something we'll be working on in the next couple of months. We don't have a release date on that set quite yet. Adam, is there anything more on that?
No, nothing else to add. It'll be out as soon as it's ready. We're working on it.
Yeah, and when we have information available, when it's posted online, if you're on Adam's email list on the city sustainability list, you'll be the first one to know, because that's how we'll share that information. Eli, here's a question for you. Are greenhouse gas emission levels an ongoing measurement that can be taken like temperature, or is it a more difficult measurement taken periodically? How is that measured?
It is taken periodically. Unfortunately, there isn't a great way to get greenhouse gas emissions specifically for a community on sort of an on-demand basis. The process involves basically going back and collecting a whole set of data on how much energy is being used, how much waste is being thrown away, how many miles people are driving, a whole range of data. And from that, relying on some standard, what are called protocols and guidance documents and just best practices that have evolved, we were able to come up with the big set of calculations that inform how many greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to San Carlos residents and businesses and other community members. So we're not able to do it in real time, at least not yet. Perhaps that might come in the future. But right now, what we are able to do is generally, we can get greenhouse gas emissions that have occurred about 18 to 12 months prior and further back. So right now, we might just be able to start looking at greenhouse gas emissions for 2019 or 2018. There's always a bit of a lag time, so we can't really get emissions for 2020 as of yet.
Okay, Eli, we have a couple more greenhouse gas inventory related questions. And then I will switch us to some vulnerability questions. So there is a question, has Peninsula Clean Energy and the City of San Carlos inventoried renewable energy generation in the city limits? With a note that renewable energy, by the question asker, intends to include community solar, wind, and storage.
So the inventory does reflect any sort of community small scale distributed generation, like a rooftop solar or any small wind turbines that might be present. So that may not be included in Peninsula Clean Energy's numbers, depending on how that data is set up. But the effects of those renewable energy systems are included in the overall greenhouse gas inventory numbers that we presented. If there is any storage that's present in the community, that is included in these numbers as well. And moving forward into the next phase, we will be able to look a little more specifically at what has been the benefit from community scale solar or rooftop solar or any storage systems that people have installed, and being able to see in particular how they have contributed to reducing San Carlos's greenhouse gas emissions.
Great, thank you. We have a question if we have a scenario for net zero sooner, like by 2035, given accelerating climate emergency. And so I will share an answer and then Eli can fill in. But we are still working on our scenarios, our forecasting. Will be when we transition to the next phase of this project, we will be putting together options for targets. So the goal right now is to ensure that at a minimum, the city of San Carlos can achieve consistency with the state's reduction targets through the CMAP. And we'll also look at some other scenarios as part of that technical analysis in the next couple of months. Eli or Adam, anything to add on that? About fair? Okay, thank you. And so we have a question about the vulnerability assessment, Eli.
Mm-hmm.
Can you briefly highlight the assumptions that went into the flood map that you showed? The question asked, how conservative is the assumption in the vulnerability assessment?
So the flood map, what we refer to as the inland flooding, the mapping is based on the flood areas that are currently identified by FEMA. So those are federal flood projection areas. And they show the areas where flooding is most likely to occur. They do not reflect the potential for stronger storms as a result of climate change. So it is certainly possible that there may be flooding outside of those areas. They just show the areas of highest risk. The sea level rise mapping, that is based on what is called the Adapting to Rising Tides program, which is a San Francisco Bay regional effort that's been ongoing for the past few years now. And that reflects a higher level of risk aversion. So it's showing a little more conservative approach. You know, this is a potentially higher level than might actually occur, but it is consistent with the level of sea level rise that the state recommends local governments consider for 2050. So I believe it is that's assuming about 24 inches of sea level rise. And Jacqueline from our team, please feel free to correct me if I got that wrong, but I think that is what is being assumed for the sea level rise projections.
Thank you. We have a question about the relationship between the CMAP and the general plan. The commenter notes that issues such as flooding and fire risk are currently discussed in the city's general plan safety element. And that will continue to be the case. And the climate mitigation and adaptation plan is a strategic plan, and it's currently set up to be more like an implementation program of the general plan. They are connected, and the city is soon will be undertaking an update to the safety element to ensure that both documents are consistent. And if Adam, if there's anything more you'd like to add on that we can share that now. We can also follow up with more information online.
Yeah, I'll just say the safety element will relate somewhat to the adaptation side of this, and will frequently, you know, may point to the adaptation side of this plan. You know, refer here for more details on something that's specific to climate change, like sea level rise or increased threat of wildfire, things like that.
Great. Yeah, so the general plan will maintain the city's vision and goals, the overarching policies for public safety, and the CMAP is going to be strategic, probably more programmatic and project-focused, action-oriented, and they both work together to achieve shared goals. We have a question, and we're not going to be able to answer all the questions tonight, but we will, anything we don't get to this evening, we can follow up and post online. There's a question asking about the percentage of the city's budget spent on energy consumption efforts, and I don't believe we have that answer this evening. So we'll have to follow up on that. There's a comment about baseline being 2005 and the next analysis occurred in 2015, which seemed like a long period. And I can clarify that the city has in fact had regular inventories since 2005. The 2015 marker was a point in time when the climate action plan's performance against greenhouse gas emissions was more deeply assessed. So the city conducts greenhouse gas emissions inventories on a regular basis, trying to get to them annually when resources allow, and then does a kind of a deeper dive on the effectiveness of the CAP every 3 to 5 years or so. So that's why we're updating it. It's 2020 and time for an update. Okay, so I think I'm gonna, it's time for us to transition to the small group discussions. Thanks so much for sharing your questions with us, and please continue to send those as you have them. When you're in the main room with us, you'll be able to send your questions by chat to me. When you go into your small breakout rooms, you'll be able to chat just with the folks who are in your breakout room. And then when you come back to the main room, you can chat with me again. So just that's how Zoom works. Those are the mechanics. So we have organized you randomly. We let Zoom assign you to a group. We have 5 groups this evening. And your group size will be about 8 to 10 people. You will have a facilitator and you will have a note taker. And you're gonna, our facilitator is gonna take you through introductions. And during that time, we're gonna ask you to select a spokesperson for your group who will be the report back when we come back in an hour. And then we have a set of questions that will cover the energy sector, transportation sector, waste, extreme events, and implementation. So we do have a set of questions that we really would like to go through tonight, and they're the same questions for every group. You may have topics that you want to bring up that may not kind of fit neatly into a question, and if there isn't that opportunity to share the information that you wanted to share this evening, please feel free to share that with us by chat or follow up with us by email. But we do think this next hour that you have together should provide a pretty good opportunity for you to cover a wide range of topics related to climate action. So in just a moment, Tarina is going to initiate the process to put us into breakout rooms. I believe you'll get a pop-up on your screen, so please accept that and you will transport into a smaller group. While you're in the breakout room, you have the option to return to the main room or to leave the meeting. We'd encourage you to stay with us through the end of the meeting, but we know that things come up and you may not have that time. If anything happens in your small group that, you know, if you have any technical difficulties, you are free to go back to the main room. And Tarina can help you go back to a breakout room if something comes up. If you accidentally get disconnected, please rejoin us and we can get you redirected where you need to be. So with that, I think we are ready to change. And Tarina, you can get us started.
Good. I'd also like to add a shout out for Nicole. She did a wonderful job.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to apologize to my group because we didn't get through the last question on implementation. So I'm sorry, I did my best, but we got a lot of good comments.
Yeah.
So the others.
Well, I want to do a big thank you to our facilitators. I know this is a very exciting topic. Many of you are extremely passionate about it and have a lot to share. So if you weren't able to get through everything, you will receive one more email from Adam, I believe, about this workshop. We have a post-workshop survey that we will send to you by email. You can click, it's a Google form, and it's got an open-ended area where you should feel free to share with us anything that you didn't get to cover tonight. So you should get that, I think, tomorrow or this week for sure. Okay, well, we just wanted to take just a few moments here. Again, we committed to wrap up at 8:30, so that's about 6 to 10 minutes out, depending on which clock. I don't know about you, but the clocks in my house are not in sync. So we have just at least 5 minutes here for some quick report outs. So we will go to the representative for group 1, who is Kathy. And those of us who are, Kathy, you are unmuted. So why don't you share with us the highlights or some summary points of your group?
Okay, I'll just go over the highlight points. We've for energy, we really talked about that people felt like there needed to be more incentives and more expertise, more sharing of information for people trying to go electric, trying to transition from gas to electric, that there's just not a lot of expertise and incentives and information. People feel like they're on their own. That was kind of the big one that we talked about there. Under transportation, we had a big topic. We talked about gas-powered lawnmowers and leaf blowers and how we can start to, whether the city mandates or it helps incentivize converting away from those. More electric vehicle chargers, more promoting of walking and biking. Some of the changes we've had recently, how do we make those more permanent, with our downtown being more walkable and bikeable. And a big one on there was make the town safe for biking with protected paths for bikers. Waste, we just talked more about promoting composting throughout the city. The big thing we talked about, extreme events, we talked about wildfire, some issues up in the canyons with vegetation that's overgrown, sea level change, how that would impact some of our important areas. I'll try to move faster. The big thing we talked about was just more information for people, the big concept of drawdown.org, like how we get the biggest bang for the buck and how we communicate that to the most people, and just more the need for people to have more information, highlighting residents who've made changes or how we know what are the most important changes to make, how we get more information.
Great, thank you. For group 2, I believe it is Ruth Anderson. Oh,
sorry.
There you go.
Great. A lot of the same points were brought up, or some of them. The main one was the kind of low-hanging fruit aspect of electrification rather than natural gas, and discussing the idea of being more proactive in terms of new construction and being electrification rather than natural gas in that sphere. Another thing that was brought up was encouraging bike use and electrical car usage. A question whether are people using the charging stations? Are they not? Can there be more maybe transparency about that? And also the idea of the city changing its fleet. What barriers are there to the city perhaps replacing their existing fleet with electric vehicles, and how plausible that, how feasible that is. We also spoke about recycling, reducing, excuse me, recycling, reducing plastics in the recycling stream, more information about what can be recycled, what can't, information from in terms of what we are putting in our bins, and what how we could put less stuff into our bins. In terms of extreme hazards, sea level concerns, of course, also the heat events and cooling centers for vulnerable people. And then finally, one point that was brought up was the idea of San Carlos being a future-oriented place, specifically toward children, our own children, our friends' children, and encouraging a, I guess I would say a positive outlook for them in terms of things they can do to help improve the situation that we find ourselves in. I hope I'm not forgetting anything, but those were some of the main. Leaf blowers did come up in our group as well. It's kind of a quiet storm issue. The mayor did share that they really haven't been hearing about it from people, but a couple of members of our group are feeling that it is time for leaf blowers to be on the agenda. And I believe I've mentioned the main high points.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth and Group 2. And we do have the notes, so don't worry that we have all the detailed notes to back up these summary points. Group 3 is going to be represented by Sharon, and I'll unmute you, Sharon, and feel free to. All right, there you go.
Okay, I took lots of notes, so I'm going to go as fast as I can here.
Yeah, and feel free, where your group had alignment with some of the other comments shared already, feel free to just note that if that's easier for you.
We'd like to see an increase in solar and electric cars in the city of San Carlos, requiring new buildings to have solar on them, find a way to get off of gas, and to address embodied carbon in construction and new buildings. From a personal standpoint in individual homes, better understanding about how to address vampire loads and learning better ways to shade to block solar heat gain so that you reduce your energy demand. There was a great idea about finding a way to do bulk buying like SunShare does for PV, and whether or not that could be expanded for things like no gas appliances or more efficient water heaters. Transportation, talked about a Laurel Street shuttle to different neighborhoods so people could get down to the main area without having to drive. Increasing bike lanes, more electric car infrastructure, and to really optimize that for daytime charging. Somebody had the idea of golf carts for travel around town. We didn't know if that was legal or not. Municipal fleet changing over to electric, having an electric car share, and not parking on streets so that the bike lanes could be used. And someone had the idea of a solar powered gondola from the hill down to the flats. Going into waste, reduce single-use plastics. Somebody was mentioning San Carlos Buy Nothing's Facebook group, which lets people recycle within their own community. School field trip to the recycling center to increase appreciation of where garbage actually goes. Community group for fixing things. The Fix-It Clinic could also be tied to a tool lending library so people don't have to buy their own tools. Mentioned that Ox Mountain is nearly full and that costs will rise soon when that happens, and an understanding of that might help people reduce now. And somebody mentioned it's hard to find alternatives to plastic packaging. Extreme events, we talked about wildfires and the need for resiliency in the electric grid. Talked about the idea of a community source local battery that you could share amongst your immediate neighbors. Sonia had a really great way of thinking about it. Talked about communities as lattices, overlapping grids of resources and people. And we all agreed we'd like to see the power lines undergrounded. Implementation, high priority on climate action for the city. Adopt the all-electric reach codes as a future thinking approach to climate action. It's very important. Should be a strategic plan that focuses on action, and it must be a high priority. Community service projects could happen in the community instead of or in addition to some of the events that San Carlos is so good at planning. There's a neighbors helping neighbors that's emerged as kind of a grassroots effort in San Carlos, and that kind of programming was seen as very positive. City could list grassroots organizations for connecting people to do this kind of volunteer work. Looking for a place for a community garden. It increases community and seems like a good thing to do. And incentives for replacing existing gas appliances in homes. We talked about the tool library for sharing equipment, and Actera, local green organization, lends induction cooktops, small ones, so people can try them out and increase the use of that instead of gas.
All right, well, those are a lot of great ideas. Thanks, Sharon in group 3. So group 4, your highlights, I believe, will be shared by Kay Goforth.
Hi. I was not taking notes while we were talking, so this is a quick recap from the last few seconds trying to capture everything. We felt very strongly that the focus, the city's primary focus needs to be on transportation and building energy, because those are the two biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Doesn't mean we ignore waste, but we saw waste as a somewhat secondary concern to the transportation and building energy. We had very strong support for reach codes and requiring full electrification of buildings, residential and commercial buildings, so we can eventually eliminate gas infrastructure. Let's see, under transportation, We talked a lot about ways to incentivize electric vehicles, getting more charging stations available, having an electric shuttle to serve the hills, and also to go up and down the length of Laurel Street so we can keep Laurel Street as a pedestrian mall and encourage people to get out and walk around more, but also have that shuttle for those who can't do all the walking. We also felt that we need to continue working on balancing jobs and housing so that we don't have the imbalance now of people having to go elsewhere to work, or people from the East Bay having, low-income folks coming from elsewhere to work here. So affordable housing is also a piece of the transportation issue. We felt very strongly that the city needs to electrify its fleet. On the topic of waste, our, I think, primary focus was on source reduction of plastics. We can't recycle our way out of this problem. We need to get rid of the plastics. The emissions from plastics aren't just from when we dispose of them. There's a lot generated during the production of plastics. We didn't really get into that, but reducing at the source and just not having to rely on plastics as much would be ideal. And we talked about the fact that people are kind of stuck dealing with a lot more plastics now. People are doing takeout. A lot of the restaurants have gone back to using the black plastic trays, and if the city could do something to work with them to try to get away from that, that would be helpful. On vulnerabilities, talked about the obvious, excuse me, fire, extreme heat, and the air quality issues from the fires. Sea level rise, major vulnerability is that our wastewater treatment plant is in an area that would be inundated. Things to reduce vulnerability, we talked about microgrids for resiliency, that would give us greater resiliency during power shutoffs. Short of that, making portable batteries, solar batteries, more widely available. PCE is doing a little bit of that for people who are medically vulnerable, but making those more widespread so that people can, keep themselves powered at least for a few hours during a shutoff. We felt that we want the city to really establish some bold goals here. The biggest reductions that we saw in recent years was from building energy that came about as a result of Peninsula Clean Energy, which was a regional effort. We need something on that scale to tackle the transportation issue. It's not something that San Carlos is going to be able to do on its own, although there is much that San Carlos can do. And we also felt very strongly that the plan needs to include timelines and needs to be clear about who's responsible for each action that is committed to, and there needs to be measurable metrics and regular reporting back to the community for community oversight, and to keep the community engaged in this process so that everybody knows they have to be a part of it all.
Okay. Thank you, Kay and group 4. And so now we're to our last group. So hold tight, we're almost there. David Britton is going to do the highlights of group 5 with an emphasis maybe on anything that, any new ideas that we haven't heard in the previous groups yet.
I'll try to keep it quick. So on the energy sector, is identified there's a real lack of contractor expertise related to kind of upgrading homes, and it's hard to find people who have the qualifications, and kind of tying that into the fact that some of the city's programs around solar upgrades have been successful around bulk buying, and therefore bulk buying might bring contractors with the right expertise into the city. And kind of somewhat related, a good way of getting the ball rolling is with new builds and looking for all electric new builds as the first stage towards improving the amount of expertise around electric upgrades. There was also a comment about San Carlos having more energy independence and resilience with microgrids and batteries. Transportation, I think one of the main things we talked about was just how bike and pedestrian unfriendly San Carlos is, and it's still, despite the good work that's been done, there's still a huge amount of work to be done there to improve the amount that we bike and walk around our city rather than drive. There's a question about the previous climate action plan had that the city was going to upgrade their vehicles, and there's a question about whether that had happened, and if not, why not. So it was just an open question. And apparently permits for getting electric chargers installed are expensive. Why are they being kind of charged for? And can we reduce the prices there? On waste, there was just a concern, someone else had mentioned about communication, and there was a lot of lacking clarity about what was being recycled. Are we wasting our time? What's happening to our waste? And also a question about environmental justice and whether we're shipping our waste out to more vulnerable communities. And similarly to the previous group, a question about what the city could do about stopping the use of plastic locally. And extreme events, we talked about the vulnerability of some of the city's infrastructure, the waste recycling in particular, or waste in particular, and smoke levels from wildfire. And a surprise at the map that was shown at the start of the presentation about how vulnerable to wildfire the city was. That was a surprise to a couple of people in our group. So perhaps something that should be communicated more widely.
Okay, thank you, David, and Group 5. Well, thank all. I really appreciate that you all joined us tonight. Eli, can we do our wrap-up slide? We know you have many competing demands for your time, and there's a lot that you could turn your attention to right now. So we do appreciate that you were able to spend time with us this evening. You all came to this with all your great ideas. This debrief just reminded me of how committed you are in San Carlos to pushing toward what's next. So what we're going to do is we take all your comments very seriously. We're going to spend the time to go through the meeting notes, to listen to the meeting again, to go through your questions, synthesize what we've heard back from you tonight. On the technical side of things, we'll be working to analyze options for greenhouse gas reduction targets in the next couple of months, to work on a forecast of greenhouse gas emissions to go with that. We're going to start putting some numbers to quantify the benefits of existing actions and getting a better understanding of what has been done. Also dig into why some things may not have been implemented, as some of you have asked about. So then we can start to brainstorm new ideas. So we will keep you all updated through the city's website. So if you have not gone to that website, I encourage you to bookmark it and have it a place you check out regularly. At the moment, we have the handouts that we provided as some information before this evening. I believe Adam also uploaded the greenhouse gas emissions inventory memo, so you can take a look at that. Any new information will go there. And if you have questions and curiosities, if you're not seeing action from us, feel free to email Adam, and he will share anything he hears back with our consultant team. So thank you all again. With that, we are wrapping up tonight, and there will be more outreach and workshop opportunities, and we really hope to see you again. Ideally, we see you all again in person. If not, we'll see you here on Zoom sometime soon. Take care, everyone.
Tammy.
Oh, yes. Oh, Mayor Collins.
Yeah, I just want to get one final word in. I want to get in a plug for Measure RR. I don't know if anybody's still listening at Caltrain. It's on the November ballot.
Okay, I think we're still here. We haven't cut off yet.
Okay.
All right. Get some sleep, everybody, and have a great rest of your week. Good night.
Thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was outstanding.
Thank you very much. Well organized. Appreciate it.
Terrific.